Let me tell you something about humans. We, the mighty Ziraxian Empire, with our superior technology and thousand-year-old civilization, thought they were nothing but glorified primates with a knack for blowing themselves up. Hey, what a cosmic joke that turned out to be. My name is Krax Bazoon, Senior Ambassador of the Ziraxian Diplomatic Corps, and I'm still trying to wrap my 3 brain lobes around how spectacularly wrong we were about these mammals. You want to know the worst part? We pride ourselves on being excellent judges of character. Our empire spans 17 star systems. We've encountered 43 sentient species. We've been the dominant force in this sector of the galaxy for over 12,000 years. And yet we completely misjudged the hairless, soft-skinned creatures from that watery rock they call Earth. Our relationship with humans has been, shall we say, complicated. When their primitive warp ships first stumbled into our territory, our High Council dismissed them as barely worth acknowledging. Our military strategists laughed at their outdated weapons technology. Our cultural experts deemed their civilization chaotic and doomed to self-destruction within a decade. And then came the Proxima incident. I won't bore you with the details. Let's just say we underestimated their resourcefulness, their adaptability, and their absolutely infuriating refusal to surrender even when vastly outgunned. 3 of our most advanced battlecruisers, 3 against 1 human frigate. The official records call it a strategic withdrawal, but between you and me? We ran away with our posterior tentacles between our legs. Which brings us to the current situation. After 5 years of tense standoffs, occasional skirmishes, and enough diplomatic doublespeak to fill the great library of Zirax Prime twice over, we finally agreed to peace negotiations. The location? Nexus 7. A miserable little mining planet on the border between our territories. The atmosphere is barely breathable for either species, the accommodations are laughably primitive, and the local cuisine would make a garbage compactor malfunction. Perfect neutral ground, right? As I stood on the landing pad watching the human delegation arrive, I couldn't help but notice their military escort, particularly Sergeant Jamie Parker. Average height, average build, utterly unremarkable by human standards. Yet there was something in those eyes, something that made all 3 of my hearts skip a beat. Little did I know that within 26 hours, this unremarkable human would save the future of the Ziraxian Empire, upend 1,000 years of royal tradition, and make me seriously reconsider my career choices. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. When Queen Valera arrived with the royal entourage, including her precocious daughter, Princess Talia, whose curiosity was matched only by her talent for finding trouble. Royal functions are, without exception, the most mind-numbing experiences in the known universe. But this particular diplomatic reception was even worse than usual. Imagine 300 dignitaries from both species crammed into the Nexus 7 administrative dome, everyone pretending to enjoy themselves while secretly calculating how quickly they could reach their weapons if negotiations went south. Queen Valera was in rare form that evening, her ceremonial crown glittering under the dome's harsh lighting as she graciously endured human Ambassador Lee's tedious speech about building bridges between our great civilizations. Princess Talia, meanwhile, was clearly suffering through what we Ziraxians call 4th stage boredom, the phase right before public mischief becomes inevitable. Ambassador Bazoon, the Queen whispered to me during a particularly dry portion of the human speech. Please ensure my daughter remains within sight at all times. She's been fascinated by humans since watching those entertainment broadcasts we intercepted. I bowed respectfully. Of course, your luminescence. The royal guards are. I turned to gesture toward the 6 elite Ziraxian royal guards who had been flanking the princess just moments before. 6 elite guards who were now staring at an empty space where an 8-year-old princess should have been. Completely useless, I finished, my scales flushing pale yellow with alarm. The Queen's upper eyes narrowed dangerously. Find her. Now. Have you ever tried to discreetly search for a missing royal child while maintaining the appearance that absolutely nothing is wrong during high-stakes peace negotiations? Let me tell you, it's not covered in diplomatic training. I subtly activated my communication implant, alerting security without alerting the humans. "Code green sparkle," I murmured. "Using our ridiculous code for the princess has wandered off again. Nobody panic. But if we don't find her, we're all getting demoted to waste management on the outer colonies." That's when the first explosion hit. The floor beneath us trembled. Glasses shattered. Both humans and Ziraxians looked around in confusion. Then the emergency sirens began their wailing. "Attention all personnel," blared the automated system. "Mining level collapse detected in sectors 7 through 12. This is not a drill. Please proceed to designated evacuation areas." I locked eyes with Queen Valera. We both knew. Princess Talia had mentioned wanting to see the shiny extraction machines earlier that day. The royal guards finally sprang into action, surrounding the Queen as the room erupted into controlled chaos. Human security personnel were efficiently guiding their delegation toward the exits. Ambassador Lee approached us, his face a mask of diplomatic concern. "Your Majesty, our sensors indicate this is a structural collapse, not an attack. We should evacuate immediately." The Queen's voice was ice. "My daughter is missing." That's when I noticed the human Sergeant Parker standing slightly apart from the others. While everyone else was moving toward the exits, Parker's attention was focused elsewhere. Following that gaze, I spotted a small service door, slightly ajar, leading toward the mining levels. Before anyone could stop him, Parker approached the Queen directly, a violation of at least 16 diplomatic protocols. "Your Highness," he said, not quite getting the honorific right. "Does your daughter have purple scales with gold flecks and a thing for asking too many questions?" The Queen's posture shifted instantly. "You've seen her?" Parker nodded. "About 20 minutes ago. She was asking me about Earth mining techniques compared to whatever you folks use. Said something about wanting to see the big drills in action." Another explosion rocked the building, stronger this time. The structural integrity warnings increased in urgency. "The mining levels are collapsing," one of our engineers shouted. "If she's down there." Parker didn't wait for the rest. With an efficiency that was almost Ziraxian, he checked his sidearm, grabbed an emergency kit from a wall panel, and headed toward the service door. "Parker, what are you doing?" Ambassador Lee called after him. The human glanced back, shrugged, and said with a casualness that still baffles me, "Going to get the kid. Start of evac, I'll catch up." And just like that, he disappeared through the door toward the rapidly collapsing mining levels, leaving both delegations staring in stunned silence. Our royal guards, trained for centuries in the art of protection, looked at each other in confusion. One of them finally stepped forward. "Your luminescence, I volunteer to." "Too late," the Queen said, watching the door swing shut behind Parker. "The human is already gone." Another tremor, more violent than before. Part of the ceiling came down at the far end of the room. "We need to evacuate now," Ambassador Lee insisted. As we rushed toward the exits, I couldn't help wondering why this unremarkable human had just voluntarily entered a death trap for a child he'd met only once, a child belonging to a species that, until very recently, had been his enemy. It made absolutely no sense, which, I would soon learn, is exactly what makes humans so terrifyingly unpredictable. While the rest of us were being efficiently herded into evacuation shuttles, I managed to access the mining level's security feed on my datapad. Call it curiosity, call it a diplomatic duty to monitor the situation, either way, I found myself watching Sergeant Parker's rescue attempt live, alongside a very tense Queen Valera. Parker moved through the collapsing tunnels with a strange combination of recklessness and calculation that I've since learned is uniquely human. Where a Ziraxian would proceed with careful planning and precise movements, this human seemed to be, what's their phrase? Winging it? Is he attempting to get himself killed? Queen Valera asked as we watched Parker slide under a falling support beam with milliseconds to spare. I believe your luminescence. He's attempting the opposite, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. The mining levels of Nexus 7 are a labyrinthine nightmare under normal circumstances. During a structural collapse? They're essentially an elaborate death trap. Support beams creaked ominously. Dust filled the air. Automated drilling equipment, disconnected from central control, continued mindlessly boring into increasingly unstable rock faces. And there was Parker, consulting a small handheld device as he navigated the chaos. It took me a moment to realize he had somehow obtained a life sign scanner and was using it to track the princess. That's Ziraxian technology, I sputtered. How did he even activate it? It requires a 7-digit security clearance and biorhythmic synchronization. The Queen didn't respond, her 4 eyes fixed on the screen as Parker narrowly avoided being crushed by a falling rock slab. What followed was a masterclass in what humans call improvisation, a concept our species finds deeply unsettling. When a security door wouldn't open, Parker didn't waste time trying to bypass the electronic lock, he simply shot it. When toxic gas began filling one corridor, he ripped fabric from his uniform, soaked it in some liquid from his emergency kit, and created a makeshift respirator. When faced with a gap too wide to jump, he used mining equipment to create an unstable but functional bridge. Is this normal human behavior? The Queen asked, her voice somewhere between horrified and impressed. I believe, your luminescence. This is what they call Monday, I replied dryly, quoting a human phrase I'd once heard. After 17 excruciating minutes, Parker's scanner led him to a partially collapsed tunnel where, beneath a tangle of metal and rock, we could just make out the princess's distinctive purple scales. Tullia, Parker called out, his voice muffled by his improvised mask. Princess, can you hear me? I'm stuck, came the faint reply, and my breathing sac is compressed. For Ziraxian children, a compressed breathing sac is life-threatening. Without emergency treatment, she would suffocate within minutes. Parker didn't hesitate. He began clearing debris with seemingly impossible strength. I've since learned that humans can experience something called an adrenaline rush in emergency situations, temporarily giving them enhanced physical capabilities. At the time, however, it looked like madness. The structural integrity of that section is at 12%, one of our engineers noted, watching the feed. If he moves the wrong piece, he's going to get them both killed, another added helpfully. But Parker wasn't moving pieces randomly. Somehow, this untrained human was instinctively identifying the key support points of the debris pile. He cleared a path to the princess with surgical precision, all while the tunnel continued to collapse around them. When he finally reached her, I expected him to immediately grab her and run. Instead, he took a moment to check her injuries, speaking in a calm, reassuring tone that seemed wildly inappropriate given their imminent death. Hey there, Purple. Got yourself in a bit of trouble, huh? Yeah. Don't worry, we'll have you out in a jiffy. He produced a small medical device from his kit. This might feel weird, but it'll help your breathing, okay? The princess nodded weakly as Parker attached the device to her breathing sac. It was a human oxygen supplement, not designed for Ziraxian physiology, but he'd somehow modified it on the fly. That human just performed an emergency xenobiological adaptation with a standard-issue med kit, our chief medical officer whispered in awe. Before anyone could respond, the ceiling began to give way entirely. Parker scooped up the princess, shielding her with his body as debris rained down. A particularly large chunk of metal struck his back, and we could see him wince in pain. But he didn't stop moving. What followed was the most hair-raising, or in our case, scale-raising escape I've ever witnessed. With the princess tucked securely against his chest, Parker navigated the increasingly unstable tunnels, the pathway behind them collapsing almost immediately after they passed. When their primary exit route was blocked by a cave-in, Parker didn't panic. He consulted a mental map of the facility that he had apparently memorized during his descent and chose an alternative route through the maintenance shafts, a route that even most Nexus 7 workers wouldn't know about. "Who is this human?" the Queen demanded, her voice tight with emotion. "Just a sergeant," I replied, equally baffled. "Just a regular human sergeant." As they approached the surface, one final explosion rocked the facility. Parker stumbled, clearly struggling with his injuries and the princess's weight. For a terrible moment, it seemed they wouldn't make it. Then Parker did something I still can't explain rationally. He laughed. In the face of almost certain death, this bizarre creature found humor. "Well, Purple," we heard him say between labored breaths, "if we make it out of this, you owe me a story about why your mom has 4 eyes and you only have 3. Deal?" "Ill?" The princess remarkably giggled. "Deal." With that absurd exchange apparently boosting his resolve, Parker made one final push toward the surface access hatch, emerging into the open air just as the last of the mining level collapsed behind them. He stood there for a moment, covered in dust and blood, some of it red, some of it the distinctive blue of Ziraxian royalty, looking almost surprised to be alive. Then he gently set down the princess, checked her breathing one more time, and promptly collapsed. 3 hours later, in the emergency medical facility of our diplomatic vessel, I witnessed something unprecedented in 12,000 years of Ziraxian history. Our queen, sovereign of the 17 systems, keeper of the sacred flame, and destroyer of the Vorax armada, was pacing anxiously outside a medical bay occupied by a single, unremarkable human. Princess Talia had been treated and released almost immediately. Ziraxian children are remarkably resilient, and her injuries were superficial. Parker, on the other hand, had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, second-degree burns across 20% of his body, and enough toxins in his system from the mining-level gases to kill a Grunthian mud beast. Will he survive? Queen Valera demanded of the human doctor who had been permitted aboard to treat Parker. Dr. Sanchez looked up from her medical scanner with an expression I would later learn was called professional nonchalance. "He'll be fine," she said, shrugging. "I've seen Jamie in worse shape after shore leave on Europa." The Queen's scales shifted to a deep purple of confusion. "Your species considers this normal?" "For Parker, pretty much," Dr. Sanchez replied, applying some sort of regenerative foam to the worst of the burns. "He'll be complaining about missing poker night by tomorrow." The Queen's confusion was understandable. In Ziraxian culture, anyone who saved a royal life would be elevated immediately to the highest ranks of society, given wealth beyond imagination, and probably have several epic poems written about their bravery. The human medical professional was treating it like Parker had simply finished an unremarkable task. When Parker finally regained consciousness, the Queen insisted on being the first to speak with him. I accompanied her as both translator and cultural advisor, though I was beginning to suspect my understanding of humans was woefully inadequate. "Sergeant Parker," the Queen began formally, "the Ziraxian Empire acknowledges the life debt now owed to you for the salvation of the royal bloodline." Parker, still groggy from medication, squinted up at us. "How's the kid?" "Purple, I mean, the princess. She okay?" The Queen blinked all 4 eyes in rapid succession, a sign of deep emotion. "My daughter is well, thanks to your actions. You have the eternal gratitude of the throne." "Walmer." Parker attempted to sit up, winced, and fell back against the medical bed. "Just doing my job, Your Majesty? That's what we say for queens, right?" I interjected, "Sergeant, you should understand that in our culture, a life debt to the royal family is our most sacred obligation. The Queen must now offer appropriate compensation." Parker waved a bandaged hand dismissively. "No compensation needed. Seriously, anyone would have done the same." The Queen and I exchanged glances. This was not following the ancient protocol at all. Perhaps, I ventured, the sergeant is unfamiliar with our customs. In Ziraxian tradition, when someone saves a royal life, particularly the heir to the throne, they must be rewarded with a position of honor. Look, Parker said, clearly uncomfortable. I appreciate the thought, but I'm just a soldier. I saw a kid in trouble and I helped. That's it. The Queen leaned forward, her ceremonial robes cascading around her. Sergeant Parker, do you understand what my daughter represents to our people? She is not merely a child, she is the future of our species, the continuation of a royal lineage that has guided our civilization for millennia. Parker shrugged, then immediately regretted the motion. Kids are kids. Doesn't matter if they're human, Ziraxian, or whatever. You protect them. That's just, I don't know, basic decency? I watched the Queen's expression shift from confusion to something I'd never seen before, a kind of wondrous revelation. In that moment, I believe she understood something about humanity that had eluded our greatest scholars. Sergeant Parker, she said, with formal gravity, I hereby offer you the position of Royal Guardian to Princess Talia. The medical bay went silent. Even Dr. Sanchez, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, dropped her scanner. Parker blinked slowly. I'm sorry, what? The Royal Guardian, I explained, trying to convey the magnitude of this offer, is the highest protector of the heir to the throne. This position has been held exclusively by Ziraxian noble-born warriors for 12,000 years. No outsider has ever been considered, let alone offered the role. Parker stared at us for a long moment. You want me to quit the Earth Defense Force and come work for aliens? No offense. None taken, the Queen replied smoothly. And yes, that is precisely what I am proposing. That's Parker seemed to search for the appropriate word. That's completely crazy. I was preparing to translate this rejection into something less offensive when the medical bay door slid open and Princess Talia burst in, evading her handlers yet again. Did he say yes? She demanded, rushing to Parker's bedside. Are you going to be my guardian? You promised to teach me about Earth games. Parker looked at the young princess, then at the Queen, then at me, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief, amusement, and what I can only describe as growing curiosity. Your Majesty, he said finally, addressing the Queen directly, I'm going to need some time to think about this. The Queen inclined her head graciously, of course. And while you consider, know that this offer comes with full diplomatic status, substantial compensation, and the eternal gratitude of the Empire. As we left the medical bay, I couldn't help but notice that Parker hadn't actually said no. More surprisingly, the Queen was smiling, a rare expression that usually preceded either a particularly satisfying diplomatic victory or the obliteration of an enemy fleet. Ambassador Bazoon, she said as we walked back toward the royal quarters, I believe we have significantly underestimated these humans. I could only nod in agreement, wondering what other surprises these unpredictable mammals had in store for us. For 3 days, Sergeant Parker remained in the medical bay, ostensibly recovering from his injuries but really avoiding making a decision. I know this because I was assigned to facilitate cultural understanding, which is diplomatic speak for make sure the human doesn't cause an interstellar incident by accidentally rejecting a royal offer. On the second day, human Ambassador Lee visited Parker. I was present as the official Ziraxian representative, though I tried to remain unobtrusive in the corner of the room. Their conversation was enlightening. They want me to be some kind of alien royal bodyguard, Parker said, gesturing with a protein bar he'd been complaining wasn't real food. That's insane, right? Tell me that's insane. Ambassador Lee stroked his beard thoughtfully. Actually, Sergeant, this could be the diplomatic opportunity of the century. Parker choked on his protein bar. Excuse me. Think about it, Lee continued. No human has ever been granted such a position of trust within the Ziraxian Empire. You'd essentially be a permanent diplomatic presence in their royal court. the intelligence value alone. I'm not a spy, Parker interrupted flatly. Lee raised his hands placatingly. Of course not. You'd be exactly what they're asking for a guardian, but your mere presence would symbolize a new era of trust between our species. Parker scowled. So I'm a political pawn? I prefer cultural ambassador, Lee replied smoothly, with combat training. After Lee left, Parker turned to me with an expression I've since learned humans call completely done with this nonsense. What's your take on this, Ambassador Bazoon? Bazoon, I corrected automatically. Right, sorry, Bazoon. Level with me, is this offer legit, or am I walking into some kind of elaborate trap? The question caught me off guard. In Ziraxian culture, questioning the sincerity of a royal offer would be grounds for immediate execution. But I was beginning to understand that humans operated with a different set of assumptions. The offer is genuine, I assured him. In fact, it's unprecedented. The position of royal guardian is traditionally passed down through bloodlines that have served the throne for generations. Parker scratched his chin. So what happens to whoever was next in line? That question revealed more wisdom than I'd expected from him. General Drux Kalar. He's not pleased. But the Queen's word is absolute. Great, Parker muttered. So I'd be starting with an enemy in the royal court. Perfect. The third day brought a visitor I hadn't anticipated, Princess Talia herself, who somehow managed to evade her attendance yet again. Our security protocols were clearly in need of a significant overhaul. Have you decided yet? She demanded, climbing onto the foot of Parker's bed without permission. Aren't you supposed to be at princess school or something? Parker replied, though I noticed he was fighting a smile. It's called Royal Education and Development, and it's boring, she declared. They're teaching me about the proper ceremonial response to the Federated Moon's diplomatic overtures. I already know that stuff. She leaned forward conspiratorially. If you become my guardian, you can teach me about Earth instead. Parker raised an eyebrow. What makes you think Earth is more interesting? You have dogs, she said seriously, and pizza, and something called water parks that sound completely illogical but fascinating. The human's expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before. Your mom might not want you learning about all that Earth stuff. The princess waved a dismissive hand. Mother says understanding other cultures makes for stronger rulers. Besides, you saved my life. According to the ancient texts, that means your wisdom must be valuable. Parker snorted. I don't know about wisdom, kid. If you don't accept, she continued, suddenly serious, they'll assign General Kalar. He smells like old battle armor and never laughs at jokes. After the princess was eventually discovered and escorted back to her quarters, Parker sat in silence for a long time. Then he turned to me. If, and this is a big if, I took this job, what would it actually involve? I outlined the duties of the Royal Guardian, the ceremonial responsibilities, the security oversight, and the advisory role in the princess's education. Parker listened with surprising attention, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharper mind than I'd previously given him credit for. Finally, he nodded. I want to talk to the Queen. 1 hour later, Parker stood before Queen Valera in the medical bay, having refused to conduct such important business from a bed. He still moved gingerly, but there was a new resolve in his posture. Your Majesty, he began, with more formality than I'd heard from him before, I'm honored by your offer. I've given it serious thought. The Queen waited expectantly. I'll accept the position, Parker continued, but I have conditions. Several royal advisors gasped audibly. No one conditions a royal appointment. It simply isn't done. The Queen, however, merely looked intrigued. Proceed, Sergeant Parker. First, I want an exchange program. For every Ziraxian tradition I learn, I get to teach the princess something about Earth culture. The Queen considered this acceptable, provided all teachings are approved in advance. Second, I need autonomy to implement security protocols as I see fit, even if they're not traditional. This was more controversial, but after a moment, the Queen nodded. You will work with General Kalar on this matter. Third, Parker said, his expression completely serious, I need monthly supply shipments from Earth. The Queen frowned slightly. What supplies could Earth provide that the Empire cannot? Parker's face remained solemn. Essential cultural artifacts, critical for cross-species understanding. Very well, the Queen agreed. Is there anything else? Parker straightened to his full height, wincing slightly at the pain it clearly caused. Just one more thing. I want the right to speak freely to you and the princess, without all the formal protocol nonsense. This time, the gasps were loud enough to momentarily drown out the medical equipment's beeping. The Queen's scales shifted through several colors, rapidly a sign of intense emotional processing. Then, remarkably, she laughed a sound so rare that several advisors later told me they'd never heard it before. Granted, she said, I believe having someone who speaks their mind will be refreshing. And just like that, Sergeant Jamie Parker of the Earth Defense Force became Guardian Parker of the Ziraxian Royal Court, upending 12,000 years of tradition because he happened to be the type of human who would run into a collapsing mine to save a child he barely knew. As we finalized the arrangements, I couldn't help but wonder what these essential cultural artifacts could possibly be that were so important to Parker's acceptance of the position. I would soon find out, much to my bewilderment. One standard Ziraxian year later, and I'm still trying to process the changes that have swept through our royal court. Guardian Parker, as he's now officially called, has completely revolutionized our security protocols, much to the chagrin of General Kalar, who still looks like he swallowed something particularly unpleasant whenever Parker enters a room. Gone are the rigid, predictable patrol patterns that had remained unchanged for centuries. Gone are the ornate but functionally useless ceremonial weapons carried by the royal guards. Gone is the assumption that royal security is primarily about appearances rather than effectiveness. In their place, a security system so comprehensive yet invisible that even I, with my diplomatic clearance, find myself being politely redirected by guards I didn't notice were there. Training exercises that incorporate both Ziraxian discipline and human adaptability. And most shocking of all, Princess Talia, now capable of 3 different self-defense techniques that would have been considered wildly inappropriate for royalty just months ago. A princess who can defend herself, Parker explained to the initially horrified royal tutors, is a princess who gives her guardians more options in a crisis. The Queen remarkably approved. But the security overhaul isn't even the most significant change. The diplomatic corps, my domain, has been buzzing with reports of improved human-Ziraxian relations across all sectors. Trade agreements that had stalled for years suddenly moving forward. Cultural exchange programs oversubscribed on both sides. Even talk of a joint military exercise, something that would have been unthinkable before. All because one human ran into a collapsing mine shaft to save a child. When I mention this to Parker during one of our now regular strategy sessions, he just shrugs that distinctly human gesture that simultaneously means everything and nothing. People overcomplicate things, he says, reviewing the security plans for an upcoming diplomatic visit. Most folks, human or Ziraxian, just want to know their kids are safe and their neighbors aren't planning to blow them up. Everything else is details. This, I've come to realize, is the essence of humanity that we Ziraxians failed to understand for so long. Where we see complex protocols and ancient traditions, they see problems to solve. Where we proceed with careful deliberation, they leap into action. Where we build elaborate hierarchies, they build relationships. It's chaotic, undignified, and maddeningly effective. Oh, and those essential cultural artifacts Parker insisted on having shipped monthly from Earth. Turns out they were playing cards, board games, and most precious of all, authentic pizza. Yes, pizza. Flatbread with sauce and cheese that has become the unexpected centerpiece of weekly cultural exchange sessions between Parker and the princess. Sessions that now include several young members of noble houses, 2 junior diplomats, and, if you can believe it, the Queen herself on occasion. I walked in on one such session last week to find Parker teaching them all something called poker, which seems to involve equal parts mathematics, psychological warfare, and the ability to lie with a straight face. Is this really an essential Earth cultural practice? I asked, watching the princess gleefully collect a pile of betting chips after bluffing the Queen out of a hand. Parker grinned. Ambassador Bazoon, this game has taught her more about human psychology, risk assessment, and resource management than a year of formal education. And the pizza? I nodded toward the strange-smelling food they were consuming. That, he said with complete seriousness, is just because the food here is terrible. I couldn't even argue with that. So here we are. The mighty Ziraxian Empire, conquerors of 17 star systems, with our 1,000-year traditions and carefully crafted protocols, completely upended by one human who couldn't walk past a child in danger. If this is what humans are truly like, this stubborn, irreverent, pizza-obsessed species who value the life of a single child over their own safety, then perhaps we should be grateful they came in peace. Because if they ever decide not to, may the Ancient Ones help us all. But at least we'll go down with better security protocols and a much improved understanding of poker. And pizza. We'll definitely have pizza.